The average person will spend 90,000 hours at their job over the course of their lifetime. Shouldn't you be doing something you love? Welcome to Second Chapter Careers, the podcast that shares real stories of real people who left unsatisfying or imperfect jobs to pursue careers they love, offering you inspiration and practical insights to help you find a career that truly transforms your life. Today, I am honored to have Lianne Forman. Welcome, Lianne.
Thank you.
Let's jump right in, and you can start by telling us a little bit about your background and who you are and where you came from.
Sure. I grew up in West Hartford, Connecticut. So for all New York, New Jersey people, that's out of town. My father actually was a lawyer. He was a workers' compensation attorney in Hartford, Connecticut. And I think that was probably my first exposure to the law, which is what I ended up doing with my career. I went to Brandeis University for undergrad. I worked for a year. I moved to New York City. I worked for a year trying to figure out if I wanted to go to law school, didn't want to go to law school. Ended up working for the American Jewish Congress, thinking I might want to go into lobbying. And then I started Columbia Law School the following year after moving to this city. And that's where I started my career. I became a lawyer after graduating from Columbia Law School.
Was there a moment in that year of working for the American Jewish Congress that you said, yes, now I know I want to be a lawyer? I know a lot of people consider it, so I just want to share a little bit about the process. Maybe you can help other people making that decision. Did you have an aha moment?
Sure. I think my entire childhood, everybody says that's not fair. I think my entire childhood, I was completely hyper focused on justice, like what was right, what was wrong, what was unjust, what was fair. I was a very good negotiator. My father used to always say to me, "You're going to make a good lawyer one day," because I could negotiate with him. I don't know if that's what planted the seed, but I was in college. I actually thought I wanted to go into art therapy. That was where I was heading. I was majoring in art history until I decided to spend a semester abroad in Israel. And when I did that, I couldn't also major in art history. I had to give up one or the other. So I ended up minoring in art history. And I said, I really want to help people. And I think like art therapy would be great. I didn't know anything about it, but I started realizing that any kind of therapeutic relationship like that, you're going to bring your problems home with you. It's going to be very intense, which is very ironic considering where my career took me, which you know about, Sari, but we'll get there in a minute. And I wanted a little bit of an arm's length distance between the person I was helping, their problems, and then a little bit more emotional distance. And so I thought, okay, law is a great way to use my skill set, to use my organizational abilities, my analytical skills. And, that's why I took that year. It wasn't so much to have an aha moment. It was really, I think, to confirm this is what I want to do with my life because A, I had been thinking about it as a child. B, my father, who I looked up to tremendously, was a lawyer. C, I have two older brothers. One became a doctor, one became an accountant. So it was only logical in this,
Right.
nice little Jewish family that there should also be a lawyer. So I felt like that was, my tough key that I had to do it. So I think that year was really to take a step back and say, is this really what you want to do? And I confirmed that that's really what I wanted to do. And I almost quit law school between my first and second year because I was starting to doubt this is what I wanted to do with my life. But my father encouraged me, finish it off, see how you do, see how you like it. And I'm glad he did. Although I will tell you that my husband and I are both lawyers. We met in law school, and we will be the first ones to advise both our children and anyone else who asks, don't become a lawyer.
Why?
I don't know where we're going to go with that, but
Why would you say that?
I mean, we both really like our jobs and we really like where we went with our careers over time. I think it's a very hard career. I think if you're an observant Jew and you want to live a certain lifestyle, especially if you're an observant Jewish woman. I remember I was invited, I won't name the high school, but I was invited for career night one year, many years ago, to a girls' high school. And I basically said to them, when everybody says, oh, you can have it all, you can do it all, that's not true. You cannot be a big partner in a huge law firm and also raise your kids. Like you have to either have a nanny, a babysitter, help from outside, and then you can go on the partnership track, or you can make compromises in your career and maybe not seek after that, big top job, but you're home more with your kids. And I said, life is just a balancing act. I was very honest. Needless to say, I was not invited back the next year for career night. So I told my truth, but I guess that wasn't what people wanted to hear.
I recently heard a quote or someone said that you can have it all, just not all at the same time. And maybe that's true. Maybe people put off their child rearing years or their career and go back to school later. My own grandmother went to law school at 40 when her kids were out of the house already. And then she loved it for the next, 28 years. But it is, everything
Yeah,
in life
I
is a
I don't I don't disagree with that. I think law, at least when I started practicing, law was very prescribed as to how to get from point A to point C to point F. It was very much about you have to work this many hours, pay your dues, be the low man or low woman on the totem pole, and then climb your way to the top. And that if you took a break from that, that break could be very detrimental. So no, I decided early on I didn't want to work for a big law firm. My husband was already doing that. And so he was slaving away and pulling the all nighters. One time I sent in literally a clean shirt and a pastrami sandwich in a car service. He was working in a firm in the city because he needed Purim Suda. He's like, I need something for Purim, so just get me something. I said, I got a pastrami sandwich and I got, and I gave him a clean shirt to change into because he was slaving over a deal. And one of us needed to be home. So, or
Yeah.
home more often, I should say. But I definitely went from, I started out full time and moved to part time, which back then was not as easy to find, but I moved to part time and continued to piece together different jobs over the years that allowed me to have that flexibility.
And did you enjoy working as a lawyer despite those compromises?
I did. I did. I had my ups and downs. My first claim to fame was my first job was in Cranford, New Jersey. And that was when Chris Christie was a junior partner at a law firm, and I was his um, junior associate. Back before Chris Christie got into politics, I knew him back before he was governor. And that was my first full-time job. And I was commuting about an hour from Teaneck, and that got a little difficult. I had one kid, then I had a second kid. And then I decided I really need to look for something part-time. I was able to actually work out a more part-time arrangement with that firm at the time. And then I got pregnant with my third kid and I was like, this is going to just get harder and harder. Also, babysitting was hard. Finding good babysitters, like the whole 9 yards. It was just, very challenging. And I wanted to work closer to home. I got very lucky. I landed another job in Hackensack, New Jersey, right next to Teaneck. And I think the biggest change for me was initially I started out that I thought I wanted to be a litigator, that whole sense of justice and right and wrong. And I was, again, I'm a great negotiator. I'm good at arguing things. So I thought, litigation. And my husband was in contracts at the time. I was like, that is the most boring thing ever. I don't think I could do contract law. Very soon after I entered the workforce and I started actually litigating cases, and I did family law, I did, traffic cases, I did other minor commercial disputes. I was very disillusioned by litigation. I won cases I didn't think I should win. Rightfully so. I mean, yeah, I'm a great advocator, but I don't think I'm that great. I lost cases that I thought I should win. I, got very entrenched and meshed in the system. And not that any system is perfect, but I saw some of its flaws and I became a little bit disillusioned. And then I started doing contracts. And for me, it was like a puzzle, that it was looking at a jigsaw puzzle, looking at where the empty pieces are. How can you fill them in? Looking at a deal and saying, where can things go south? Where can things fall apart? How can I protect against that? And that over time evolved into I became both contracts and an employment lawyer. So I was dealing with small businesses. I was dealing with, sole proprietors. I was dealing with a lot of commercial matters. I just, again, that analytical side of me, that organizational side of me, I just kept on looking at like, I love this, looking at the picture, where can I fill in the blanks? And that for me was challenging, very intellectually challenging. And my last position, which I left only, I left, I guess, officially 2020. My last position was really focused on contracts and employment law and drafting a lot of contracts. And it really, I think, gave me a very good skill set.
And you enjoyed it most of the time.
And I enjoyed it most of the time.
Okay. So why did you change? And why and
Oh,
to
that's a
what?
good so why did I change? Basically, something happened in our personal lives which really shifted my focus and my priorities in a very drastic um, and very powerful way. I have 5 children, and my second oldest child, my oldest daughter, struggled with addiction. And in 18, when she was about a year into her recovery and her she was in a stable place at that point. My husband and I had really felt throughout our journey and our family's journey that this is a topic nobody talks about. That people talk about depression, that people talk about anxiety, they talk about other mental health issues. But when it comes to substance use and addiction, in our circles and in our community, we felt it was something that was very taboo. And because of that, very few people knew what was going on with us. We didn't talk about it very publicly. And we struggled with how to support our daughter, how to support our other children. We were both working full time. It was, at one point I would say I described my life as hanging on to it with my fingernails, like my sanity, my mental health, my well-being. I was like, I could picture myself on a cliff, with my fingernails at the edge, about to fall off. At that point in 2018,
I Good.
I turned to my husband at one point and I said, we had a lot of things happen at once. It was kind of the perfect storm where we were talking to somebody and I made a comment that you would think that addiction and substance use doesn't happen in our community. It happens to be somebody very well known who said to me, "If you only knew." That was one comment, meaning it was somebody who was privy to other families and their struggles. Then my son was with us and we were walking home from shul and the rabbi had met my other daughter for the first time and he said, "Oh, I didn't realize you have another daughter." I said, "Well, I actually have 2 other daughters. One is in Florida, one is younger." And he said, "Is the Florida daughter married? And I said, "No." And I said, I don't even know what I said. I said something like she's finding herself or she's you know, in between things, just kind of that non-answer that you give when you don't want to be specific. And on the way home, I said in front of my son, I said to my husband, "I wish we could just talk about it." And my son said, "Oh, I tell people that my sister's in rehab," very, very openly. So those 2 things really kind of lodged into my brain. And then at a point, my daughter was looking for help to get into a sober living facility. And I called somebody and I said, "I wish, we could just talk about this openly. I wish we as a community could talk about this openly." And they said, "Well, why don't we? Why don't we do an event?" So in 2018, we put together an event, which basically was my husband, rabbi from the community, Rabbi Rothwax, somebody in recovery. We had somebody who specialized in addiction, had another organization with us, working with us. And we told our story for the first time publicly. There were in the room 700 people.
Wow.
It was streaming online. I think there were another 250, 300 people watching online. And so kind of in one night, we touched 1,000 lives. And we went into it, we really expected 50 to 100 people. So that was, kind of a shocking outcome. But one of the things that we did was we put feedback cards out on the chairs because being that my husband and I are both lawyers, we're very solution oriented, very organized people. And we said, this can't be a one and done. This can't be just let's, have this event and then do nothing else. So from that, we got feedback from the participants saying we want more education and awareness on addiction. We want more support. We started a family support group that May of 2018. And then the third thing that came back was working with schools. That really we want to see more education in the schools, working, within the Jewish schools. And although I was still practicing law, I started shifting my attention and time to really building out this organization. I as a lawyer, I knew enough to say, okay, you have to file to be a 501(c)(3, and you have to have bylaws, and you have to, do all these things to formally establish yourself as a not-for-profit. And I think one of the things that really enable us to be successful is we treated, although it was very personal and very much, a passion born out of our own adversity, I also treated it as a business. That if I wanted this to be something that succeeded, I had to really attack it with a plan, with an organizational chart, with a strategic, trajectory. And that's where I am now. I actually left the law officially in 2020. I was working part-time at the time, and I dedicated myself to this full time as of then, and have built it into, what has become a really amazing organization.
So there is a lot you just said there. First of all, I want to say thank you for being so open and honest about the experience. I think it's so necessary, not just in the Jewish community, but really like everywhere. I think, yeah, unfortunately, addiction is still, we're behind the ball, we're behind the curve on dealing with these issues. Probably more people than we even know need to be discussing it, both family members and people struggling. So thank you for doing what you do. It sounds like you use a lot of your legal skills and, critical thinking skills in your new position, which is amazing. Do you feel the same emotional satisfaction from this or like mental stimulation from this new position that you felt practicing
I
the law?
even greater, even greater. I think from the emotional standpoint, I'm doing that thing that I said back in college that I was afraid of doing, which is living other people's problems, bringing them home with me, feeling that weight. I'm the repository of many, many, many stories and many families and people seeking help. And I remember one specific time, I mean, for everybody who is listening who might be from Teaneck, you'll know what I'm referring to, Glad Express. I walked into Glad Express, which is a supermarket, and there were three people there who had contacted me personally for help, who knew each other from the community, but didn't know that they had this shared experience. And, my husband and I, we made a very conscious decision. We asked our daughter first and foremost, are you okay with us telling your story? Because if she had said no, we wouldn't have done it. Then we went to our four other children and we said, we want to do this. Are you ready for? There are families when something happens to them, that's all you know about them. So I said, there are people who are going to hear the name Forman and say, oh, they're the ones with the addict. So I said to my daughters who were in Mayanot at the time, I think one was in Mayanot, one was still in middle school. I said, are you ready to be the sister of the addict? Because that might be your identity. I think they were a little young to understand completely. I mean, the truth is, I think they understood, but I didn't think they understood the depth of what we went through, even though it really, really impacted them. I mean, they call addiction a family disease, and that's not for no reason. It affects everybody in the family. But I think that they didn't really understand the depth of what we experienced until we got up there and my husband told the story. That's the emotional reward. That's the, taking adversity. I mean, my husband would say for years, one of us had to keep our job and I drew the short straw. So I think he felt like, we had built this together, but one of us had to take it to the next level. In terms of the intellectual, it's actually more challenging in many ways because I have to deal with a lot of areas that I'm not as comfortable in. So, like making a budget, analyzing costs and making sure that, operations are going smoothly. And really, I was a one woman show wearing many, many different hats for a few years, building out the programming, bringing in all these different experts in addiction, prevention experts, education, psychologists, psychiatrists, treatment professionals, guidance counselors. I mean, you name it. I sought advice from everybody. And also I'm a very demanding person. I hope my staff doesn't hear this right now, but I'm a very demanding person. I don't demand perfection, I demand excellence, and I always want you to put your best foot forward, and I expect that of myself. I have I'm very hard on myself. So I came up with a program that when we started working with the schools, I first introduced in Bergen County. I met with middle school guidance counselors and principals, and then I had a separate meeting with high school guidance counselors and principals. And I would say almost every school in the area, which is a pretty big number, participated in this initial meeting. Like, this is what I'd like to do. Now, my dream at the time was build a complete curriculum that would sort of address mental health and wellness. Now, the truth is, there are curricula out there that address that. There were some schools that were already employing mental wellness models. There were some that weren't doing anything, and then everything along that whole entire spectrum. At the end of the day, I said, okay, that's too much to bite off. Let's go back to a model that we can scale. And we created a prevention program, one for middle school and one for high school. Really, I had an amazing college intern at the time who started us out. And that was what we introduced as our product, as our service. In addition to the family support group that we were already running, that was the product that we introduced in 2020. And where we ended up taking it is we now have 8 differentiated programs, all evidence-based, all steeped in the latest and greatest prevention techniques and prevention education approaches. They start in 5th grade to 12th grade. We also have a post high school, program for gap year in Israel.
So
We have
necessary.
a parent program, a faculty program. We have supplementary workshops. And over time, because of demand and requests, we've also built out what we're introducing and rolling out this year, which is specialized behavioral addiction or process addiction programming in gambling, pornography, and social media and internet safety.
Wow.
And so if you think about 2019 and we're in 2025, it's not a lot of time. Also, our model really started out in Bergen County only. And then when we started getting requests outside of Bergen County, I quickly had to scale. So over time, I've hired 3 people as part of my staff. We have one person who is very plugged into the addiction and recovery world. And I would say she's pretty much single-handedly responsible for recruiting. We now have 40 presenters with lived experience, 40 Jewish people. If anybody's listening to this and they know somebody in recovery and they've been in recovery for a year and they want to present and give back, this is a great way to do it. We have these people, and it started out with my daughter was one. And I had a young man as my other one, and that was it. I had 2 presenters, and they would go to schools in an age-appropriate way. They would talk about their story of addiction. They would talk about their journey with recovery, and then they would teach the material, teach the curriculum, the science behind addiction. How does it happen? What happens when you introduce a substance to your brain, to your body? How your brain is making connections during this time, and we don't really have a fully mature brain until we're in our mid-20s. All the science that goes with that. Q&A. It's very, very powerful. It's very impactful. And I'm just going to go on with one more thing, and then I'll let you ask a
Yes,
question.
it's fascinating.
I'll take a breath at some point. No, we're about to really hit 3 major milestones in our organizational growth. The first is that we are about to partner with our 100th school.
Wow.
So we went from 6 or 10 schools in Bergen County in 2019. I think it was 10 schools altogether to 100 around the country.
Like,
Second,
yes, if you could say that about such a difficult area.
but it's prevention education, and schools are letting us in to talk about this difficult topic, and we do have an impact. I can talk about that in a second. We do, and we know we have an impact, not just anecdotally, but we actually have data that we've been collecting. The second major milestone is we are about to conduct our 1,000th program in prevention, and the third milestone, which is the one I love the most, which is we are about to impact our over 35,000th, I can't say the TH at the end, student. So over 35,000 students that we've worked with over the years. We measure it year to year. So it could be the same kid that we saw in 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, but we count up every year. How many 5th graders do we present to? How many 8th graders? How many 10th graders? And so we are tracking numbers, we're tracking results. We have surveys. We've collected 5,000 surveys from 2 years ago, another 5,000 or 6,000 from last year, and we're putting all that information together, creating an assessment of our efficacy. Are we making an impact on these kids? We measure use, we measure awareness, we measure trends. Unfortunately, drug trends change so quickly that we're constantly, fighting to stay on top of it. But I would say we're very cutting edge in that way as well, which is great for our education. And we keep our finger on the pulse of what concerns kids. We really listen to what they're asking. We hand out index cards in many of our programs, get back anonymous questions. We use those questions to change our content or address things that we might be missing. Like if kids are telling us about a certain substance that they're using, if we didn't know about it, which usually is not the case, but if we didn't know about it, we look into it. If we see that lots of kids are asking specific questions, and this is how gambling came up. This is how, it's why we want to work on addressing gambling.
Wow. That is absolutely just, it takes my breath away to think about, first of all, how much you've accomplished in such a short time, but also that it's only scratching the surface of what the need is. And just again, just kudos for doing such an amazing job. You haven't actually mentioned the name of the organization, so I want you to just put it out here. I'll also put a note in the show notes for anyone who wants to be in touch and hear more because, obviously knowledge is power and that's really important. And I also would love to hear about the vision when you started, which was just family support. How did it roll into what it is now? Could you have envisioned that this is where you would be 5, 6 years later? Tell us
No.
a little bit about how the vision snowballed and evolved over time. But first, the names of the organization.
So originally, we were Communities Confronting Substance Use and Addiction, or CCSA. We are now, as of 2 years ago in 2023, we are now a division of OHEL Family Services. We joined a larger organization for a lot of reasons, but mainly because we are scaling and growing, and it really gave us that infrastructure that as a small organization we didn't have. I think with any organization, there is sort of this crossroads where, and we faced it many times, but you either grow or you stagnate. And, we were in Bergen County and we had a choice. Do we grow? Do we go outside of Bergen County? When I think about the trajectory of our growth, it has always been incredibly steep. We keep on getting, this year alone, I think we're going to have 10 to 12 new schools. I did not imagine there's only so much in the universe of Jewish day schools and high schools out there in the United States. We actually went to Toronto. So now we'll say Canada and North America. There's only so many Jewish day schools and high schools. And I figured at some point we would stagnate a little bit in terms of that trajectory. And we really have not. There are schools that have dropped off. There are schools that use us every other year, even though our model is really ideally every year you see us, we come back and we build on what we taught you last year. Did I imagine when I had one middle school, one high school program that I would have 8 differentiated programs for middle school? And no, I did not imagine that was going to happen. Did I imagine I was going to, have 100 partner schools? No, I did not imagine that was going to happen. It really started out with that mantra of help others, create awareness, reduce the stigma, and let's see what we can do. And again, those feedback cards from that first event in 2018 were really incredibly helpful for us to shape the pillars on which we wanted to build this. But I really did not think, we even the support group. The support group, I would say I have 250, maybe 300, email addresses, let's say, of people who contacted me over the years to be part of the support group. We don't have 300 people on at a time. We have 10, 15, 20. But that's fine. It would be very unmanageable. But again, these are people who, expressed an interest, whether they joined for a certain period of time and dropped off, or whether they came back, or whether they never came. But, we helped them in some other way to find treatment or to, take that next right step to finding resolution for themselves and for their loved one. We then expanded that to a sibling group, which we really felt that was a very underserved population, especially kind of teens and 20s. You got things like in that range. And we felt that they were, parents would come on group and they would talk a lot about, my other son or my daughter, not the person struggling with addiction, but that other person was really struggling. And what do you have for them? What do you have for them? And so it finally became, they're not going to talk openly in front of their parents. So they're not going to come to the same support group as their parents. And even from our own family experience, I know, one of my children later later on said that she really sublimated all her needs during that time because she felt like her hands were so full. She could not create any waves. She could not have any problems. And so she internalized everything. And that really made us realize as well, even just from our own personal experience, that the family suffers and everybody needs an outlet. They need a safe place to go. Now I'm in Israel. I made Aliyah almost 2 years ago.
In the middle of
And
building this empire.
yes, in the middle of building this empire. And OHEL, is an incredible partner. OHEL really came about because I knew that there were synergies with some of the things they were doing. They do school-based programs that focus on resilience, on reducing anxiety. They have a lot of teacher services, and it was just such a natural partnership. And I went to them to say, like, what can we do together? And one thing led to another. And, at the time, I have a pretty attractive portfolio. I had maybe, I don't know, 50, 60 schools I was already working with. I was expanding to different places, Florida and Atlanta and Chicago and San Diego I was in at one point. And, so I was bringing something to the table. And they obviously are a large organization that brings a lot to the table in terms of infrastructure and support. And also, relationships amongst the school community that could only help me grow as well. So it really looked like an incredible partnership, and it has been an incredible partnership, but it's also what allowed me to make up, because I'm not sure I could have come to Israel and continued to run the organization in that microcosm that we were living in. Now my staff, which still reports to me and I still run the organization or run the division, it helps to really have that infrastructure behind us to continue to take this to the next and next and next level, which is what we've been doing and what we continue to do.
I almost have no words, but I do have some questions. What was the hardest thing about getting this ball rolling that you didn't expect when you started?
I think, I don't want to say I didn't expect it because it is a tough topic, but I think there's a certain amount of resistance that, and I don't want to stereotype, there are certain communities I think that are a little more insular, a little bit more nervous about having us come. I think that there are times that I hate to be sarcastic, but I'm going to be sarcastic. I've had either schools say this is a great idea, but our parent body, our parent body is not going to want to hear this. And I feel like saying to them, don't worry, I'm not bringing joints to the class and saying, come on, everybody, light up. I'm not teaching them about drugs. I've had to explain many, many times what exposure really means. Exposure can be, hearing a news story about the opioid epidemic or overdose deaths. Exposure could be seeing an ad. Exposure could be walking the streets of New York City or Jerusalem, frankly, and smelling marijuana. That's exposure. We talk all the time about when you take your kids out to teach them across the street, you don't wait till they're 15 or 16 and say, look at the little man, look both ways. Okay, now it's safe to go. You stay in the crosswalk. We take them out when they're 3, 4, 5 and start teaching them those basic rules of survival. They're going to have to cross the street themselves one day. We want them to be able to do it safely. So the same thing with substance use and prevention. It is never too early to start talking about it in an age appropriate way. It is never too early to set boundaries and to set an example and to talk about substance use. We have alcohol as Jews in all of our rituals. It's in Kiddush, Purim, Simchat Torah, Pesach, you name it. We have alcohol galore. So already these kids are seeing it much, much early on. We want them to understand what they're seeing and why watching an adult, let's say, have a glass of wine or a shot of whiskey for l'chaim, why that's different for an adult with a fully formed brain. And doesn't mean that adults can have substance use issues, because they can. Plenty of people who struggle with addiction after their brains are fully developed. But we want them to see and understand what it is. They're sponges. A lot of kids are just sponges and they're just seeing things, but they don't know how to interpret it. And their worlds are very, very black and white and don't get nuanced until much, much later. So there's a lot to talk about. I've had to use certain schools that I've been into that are more yeshivish. Let's say I've had to use their name to get into other schools, or, Chabad schools, which they're very interconnected with each other. Thank God they're so interconnected, because we were successful in a couple of them. And all of a sudden we're, the Chabad go-to program for substance use prevention, which I love. I just think it's, we knew we were taking on a difficult topic. I didn't think I'd have to advocate as strongly in certain areas. whether it's parents, whether it's the school itself, whether it's the school board. It just sometimes is hard to, I've said there are certain schools that I have bruises on my forehead because I've had to bang my head against the wall one too many times. And I'm not giving up on them. I do hope that they come around. But thank God we have such a great and strong partnership with so many schools around the country. It's not about begging them for the work. It's about, I really hope we can open your eyes one day.
Yes, absolutely. What does your business model look like? And is it what you thought it would be when you started? Are schools paying you to come? Are you doing fundraising on top of all of these initiatives that you're building? What does the day to day look like? And how does the organization run? Maybe
So
compared to what you thought it would be when you started?
Yeah, there are three primary foundations. One is donations. That's the biggest one. The second one is grants. And the third is fees from the school. I'm going to go backwards now. With regard to fees for the school, for some school, budget is a real issue. We never want to be a line item in a school's budget. So I've never, ever charged a lot of money. I know programs that come in, outside programs that come in, I've compared pricing models. We do pay our presenters. These are people who are 1099 contractors. They do not work for us. They're not employed by us. So when they come, I'm paying them for their time and then maybe for travel as well. When we went to Toronto, we had to fly people up. When we go to Atlanta or Florida, we have some local presenters, but we try to build teams in localities where we have critical mass. New York, New Jersey, for sure, Florida as well. In other cases, we're flying, our presenters in. Some cases they have full-time jobs. They're giving up a day of work for us. It means a lot to them and it means a lot to us. And the relationship is incredible. Bottom line is I try to cover my hard costs. I'm not sure I'm covering my soft costs, my employees' time, my time, program development, program content, everything and everything. But if I can cover the airfare and the hotel and the gas mileage and, I try to build it out also. If you're going to have, a whole lot of programs, I scale it. I give an incentive to bring us in for more. So it's not per program, but it's kind of a package deal. Grants, when you talk about surprises, that was very surprising for me. I thought, especially with the opioid epidemic and all the funds that were, coming from the federal level to the state level, I thought for sure that was going to be low-hanging fruit for us. And I found out very quickly that unless you are providing education in low-income inner city public schools,
As if those
then
are the people affected.
that is not low hanging fruit whatsoever. There are private foundations out there that I've applied for grants. I've had limited success. I think there are foundations that, specifically focus on their location if they're in a specific city. And we've had partners. We do have partners. We have a great partner in Boston that's allowed us to go into some of the Boston schools. We have a great partner in Florida that's allowed us to go into some of the Florida schools and subsidize the cost to the schools. But I think there is a lot more that can be done. There is in some school districts, there are funds that are specifically earmarked for substance use prevention. You have to be able to find it. You have to be able to call the school district. Many of the schools use Title funds, Title IV and Title II funds, which can be applied to our program, but that's if they're not using it for something else. So they have to make that allocation decision. And fundraising, I had a core group of donors in Bergen County that really, really got us off the ground running and were incredibly, incredibly helpful. Over the years, it's become harder because I think two things. I think one is there's a perception now that we've joined, oh, hell, we don't need money anymore. Um, we're part of a big organization, so therefore we don't need your support, and which is so not true because everything that is donated goes to our budget. So we still need the budget. We still need the money and the support. And I think the second thing is that I think the whole situation with Israel, rightfully so, I live here now, so I can say this, it diverted people's STACA. It diverted a lot of STACA dollars and a lot of organizations, paid dearly for that. And I think there's a lot of, hey, we know this Israel situation is horrible and they need our support, but don't forget about us. We still need support. So I think that there's that tension. People only have a certain amount to give. I think especially outside of Israel, there's this, got to do something. What's the most concrete something you can do besides coming here volunteering? We picked sweet potatoes one time. So yeah, we rolled in the dirt and picked sweet potatoes. You can do that. There are doctors who came here. There are people who came back to do Miluim that, maybe don't live here anymore, but came back to do Miluim. I think that there's a tremendous tension now between the money that Israel needs and the money that other tzedakahs still very much need. But we do have a really good grant writing department in OHEL, and we work really hard to capture more opportunities than I would have ever been able to capture on my own. So I'm hoping that will also help us in the long run.
It sounds like, I mean, you clearly are so knowledgeable about so much of this nonprofit world now. Did you have that knowledge before you started, or you picked up everything on the way? I think what maybe holds people back from starting their own initiative is the sheer volume of things you need to know, the grant writing and the scaling and the Title II and Title IV, which people might not know if they're not in that world. Where is the balance between what you knew and what you picked up, and how did that play out? Was it difficult to learn, or it just happened organically? What can you tell people who are on the fence or afraid of starting their own organization?
So I mean, I think it's a little bit of both, meaning I knew enough about incorporating small businesses, organizations, not necessarily not for profits, LLCs and corporations for clients, right? So I knew enough that I could look at a statute and I could say, okay, this is where a not for profit differs from a for profit corporation. I still need bylaws. I still need to file. So that ease of being able to read a statute, understand that if I'm going to raise money in New York or New Jersey, I need to file appropriate papers to be a registered charity. Even though I incorporated in New Jersey, if I have a donor from Florida, if I have a donor from New York, I also need to be registered as a charity in those states. So that, that was not self-taught on the job. That was experience that I had going in, meaning I knew enough as a lawyer to dot the I's and cross the T's. The things about, title funds and educational approaches and prevention education and all the things that went into building the curriculum and building the content and researching drug trends. A lot of that is just my personality of being a thorough person, an organized person, having attention to detail. I think also understanding not being able to do it all, but hiring people that complement you. My assistant director, I always refer to her as she's the yin, I'm the yang, or I'm the yin and she's the yang. There are things that we do that really complement each other. And she has a lot of strengths that help, emotional, where I'm, more clinical. She has a whole background in addiction treatment and, over 2 decades of working in that field. I have lived experience that taught me what I needed to know, unfortunately, but that is where I got, my lived experience was an education. And, between learning things and being able to see it more as a business rather than as my personal project, I think that's a big difference too. One of the things that David Mandel, who's the head of OHEL, one of the things that we talked about when we first met before CCSA joined OHEL, he said, "Are you going to have founder syndrome?" And I said, "No." I said, "I know this is my baby. And I know this is born out of my own personal experience, but it is also, at the end of the day, a vehicle to serve the greater Jewish community and to help other people. And if I need to let go of it or let go of parts of it in order to make it more successful, I'm not going to hang on to it. That's not my desire here." I think just a few months ago, I think something came up. We were in conversation about something. He goes, "Do you remember I asked you if you were going to have founder syndrome?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, I said, "Thank you."
I think it's amazing that you're so self-aware um, of your professional skills and your, personal skills. A lot of what I work with is people who may not be so self-aware. And it sounds to me like that really, really served you well, which I think is fantastic. You have given us so much to think about. And I wish that this organization wasn't necessary, but being that it will probably be more necessary as unfortunately new addictions arise, I just want to wish you so much success in continuing to educate the entire community, both children and their families, to stay away from these dangers and how to manage in these difficult times. So thank you so much for speaking with me and with us, everyone listening. And and for all the amazing work that you do.